1-3 Guitar Talks Tone number 2. Our special guest today is Mr. James Seretis from the Flavor Project, the Rumble Trio, and the Hustle Season podcast. And he's going to tell you a little bit about his approach to live sound and tone creation and just all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Stay in touch with us if you want to keep up on future events and what we got going on in the shop. Sign up for our mailing list, and I'll get out of the way. Thanks, James.
All right.
Thanks for being here.
Oh. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. Oh, look. We got another person coming in here. Oh, look at that, man.
Welcome.
So I'm James Seretis. I play in some bands. I have a surf trio called the Rumble Trio. Instrumental surf music and jazz and stuff like that. I've also played in this band called Flavor Project, a Latin funk band. And then a bunch of other studio stuff, things to that extent. Also, I am on a music-themed podcast called the Hustle Season podcast. We do all types of stuff. Talk about music, review things, go see Corey Feldman, whatever. That's kind of our deal. So basically, I got things to talk about, and I guess the best thing to do first maybe is to just kind of explain what I've got here. This is the rig I bring to gigs with the Rumble Trio, which is kind of the full-on most gear I usually bring to any kind of gig. So I guess I'll start off kind of... Oh, and another thing, I think this is also important to mention. I spent a lot of time being a repair tech, first at recording studios and then just on my own, working on things like tube amps, effects pedals. I even manufactured effects pedals at one time. Anything from tape machines to spring reverb units, studio gear, all that type of stuff. So as a side effect of that is a lot of my gear is stuff that I've made or modified. So I guess I'll start talking about this amp. So first of all, the amp I got is one that I built. It started as a 70s Fender Bandmaster Reverb. Those are really cool amps because they're they're easy to turn into other stuff, and they got good bones, and they are very friendly to modifications. So basically, it was a head. Put it into a cabinet with 115. The amp is really close to a Fender Vibroverb from the early 60s, and with a couple of modifications, you basically make it what it is. So that being said, I got this guy, original transformers and chassis and some other very small things in there. The pots, everything else is new. It's been replaced. Been totally gutted. It's a very quiet amp. You'll hear in a minute. Sounds great. 40 watts. It's loud enough for gigs, but not crazy loud. Moving on, I guess. So I got the guitar here. This is one of the ones I play. I got a lot of guitars, and they all kind of do different stuff. Lately, this has been kind of the one I've been using for studio stuff and for the Rumble Trio. And also, like, I guess this one probably sees the most action out of all of them. It started as an American Strat Plus at one time, and then the neck needed a refret, and instead of getting a refret, I just ordered a Warmoth neck, and got the little reverse thing. I thought that was cool. Eventually, the body, I don't know why I changed it, but I bought a new body for it. So, there's another Warmoth body it's a semi-hollow Strat body, which you don't see that much. Basically, you can't see it because I did a sunburst finish on it, but there's a little seam around here, and there's a laminated top on it. And if you were to pull the top off, it would look like Swiss cheese. It's like all these little channels routed out around the whole thing. It's a little lighter. It has a little bit more of like a mid-range kind of spank to it. The wiring is kind of nuts. It's Fralin pickups in here. I got it wired up like a 2-pickup guitar. So if I'm going to... Let's turn the volume pedal on here. So if I'm playing and I want to go to the neck, that's a normal bridge. That middle, kind of like a Telecaster or a Gretsch or a 2 pickup guitar, and it kind of has this cool, it's very different than the traditional Strat thing where you've got these two or these two. Like, for example, neck and middle has this, like, glassy thing that everybody knows for being Strats have. And, but when you put it in the middle, man, it's got this, it has a very, kind of this notch in it that's really cool. It's almost like a, it's not as transparent as the other one. It gets a lot of punch. It's something that you don't hear on a Strat because you can't get that combination with the 5-way switch. Some just are really enjoyed. So I ended up putting that middle pickup because I never use it by itself. Just an on. So that sounds great, like that. But yeah, this is just the main guitar I use. I got a Les Paul over. It's like a custom shop Les Paul. It's also got Fralins in it. I guess one thing I would like to point out is, before I get into the effects, is pickups. And not necessarily about like tonal qualities of pickups, but output, impedance, which is basically, or DC resistance, I guess is the best thing. It basically gives you a way of measuring the output of a pickup. One of the things that happens when a pickup gets hotter is you lose top end, a little. You lose clarity a little bit, and the other thing is your effects are going to act differently if you're using a bunch of overdrives, especially like subtle effects. Having really hot pickups can like really affect the gain, and it'll make them break down earlier than you're used to, which is not a problem at all, but it is a problem if you're switching guitars a lot during a set and you have to reset everything there. So I started realizing that when I moved to lower output pickups on one guitar and then another one, that I just started swapping everything out with lower output stuff. And I actually really like the way it sounds. There's still no problem with distortion or anything. Even like on this humbucker, it's the one they call the Big Single. It's a low output, single coil like humbucker, but still you don't have any problem. It still like kicks. You know, it does all that stuff fine. But so just something to mention. I switched everything out low output and everything. I've been happier with everything. I always also I'd rather have too much of something and dial it back than not enough. Like, for example, if I would prefer my rig to have too much high end and then attenuate it with tone control or with the amp, then have it dark and then try to introduce extra treble settings, do it, because what happens is it ends up making more noise, and it never does what you think it's going to do. It just makes more noise, and it's a mess, and everything ends up sounding better. So I've always preferred to do it the other way, and I think that might come from being an engineer and mixing things, and you use subtractive EQ, which is basically you're only taking away from it, as opposed to adding, which adds noise, and things can get a little crazy. There's no reason to really add to something when you can take away from it and get the same or an even better effect. So I think that's a lot. And also to emphasize, just like messing with sounds is great for getting whatever instrument you play to sound better. Whether it's just messing around in Logic or you have your PA system for your band, even at band practices. Just the more you understand about how sound can be manipulated, it all applies to everything sound related. So whether you're doing guitar, even if you're a horn player, man, like just knowing how physics work in the context of sound, not going too crazy. You don't have to get a degree or anything. You're not doing formulas or anything like that. Just kind of knowing how an acoustic space works And it's just something that comes from experiencing it. And I'll get more into that in a little bit. But I guess I'll move on to the effects portion, which is a whole other thing. So I do a lot of different kinds of music. Most of the time it is R&B, funk, and the surf stuff. And even this stuff, you don't have to have a bunch of effects, but I think it's cool. I like the way it sounds. It inspires me to play. And I'll get into the theory of that in a little bit. But let's just go through what I got. So, and you can probably get over here for this part. I actually will point some of this out. So the whole system looks more complicated than it is. But basically, I have an effects processor on here with a effects loop, or an insert, as they'd say on a mixer, where you can take a signal, send it out to something else, bring it back in, and send it to wherever you want to go. So that in mind, that's how I've kind of built this whole board. So it comes out of my guitar, goes in this little dock right here that's got sends, returns, inputs, outputs. It's a wah pedal, a compressor, and a preamp. Those are always in the signal path, no matter what's going on. It's always happening. So, you know what that does. Compressor does a lot of stuff, but basically I got this little Vertex Effects makes this. It's called the Steel String, and it's basically a copy of a Dumble preamp. If you know, Dumble makes those amps that were used by celebrities, and it's like Stevie Ray Vaughan used them. They're like 50 grand. But they're cool. They're basically a Fender amp that is like a incredible Hulk Fender amp. It's sound great. They're pretty versatile, but this adds some of that sheen on there. So if I was to play, this is without it. This is just the amp. Very subtle. It's very subtle, but when you're doing stuff where you need there's a little more presence. It cuts some of the low end off, which these amps are usually they have a lot of clarity, but for some reason sometimes they just they don't have enough on the top end. I think it's like a mid-range thing, and this does add some high mids. It gives a little more bite. It's also one of those effects, and if you get into pedals, you'll notice that, and this is a cool and terrible thing about effects. Sometimes some amps and some guitars do not like what you're plugging through it. Doesn't mean that effect is garbage at all. It doesn't mean anything. It does mean you're probably going to have to buy more gear, which, that's either good or bad depending on who you are or who you're married to. But it definitely is a thing that happens, especially if you're in the studio and you have access to, like a handful of guitars and maybe more than one amp. Some pedals. Some combinations sound like garbage, dude. Like, this Les Paul used to sound terrible through this amp, but when I moved to the Fralins, which is like stock output 50s humbucker type thing, it opened the guitar up. It sounded better with more amps, but some stuff just sounds like terrible. Like, I have an Ampeg J12, which is a very dark amp. It's a fantastic jazz amp, like if you're playing traditional, like bebop, post-bop jazz stuff. But with some guitars, it sounds like utter garbage. Like, I have a Gretsch that's very low output, very bright, but for some reason, I don't know if it's the output or what, does not sound great in that amp. It just sounds very sterile. But then I'll plug my Archstyle. I have a Tal Farlow. I'll plug in there. It sounds like the best thing ever. It's amazing. The whole thing comes alive. So that being said, there's a lot of times where something will work and something will not work, and it doesn't mean you suck at getting tone out of stuff, or it's just not the right application. I mean, I think my first pedal, I think, was a DoD death metal distortion pedal, and for what I was doing, it did not. I don't know why. I just thought the most distortion would be the best for some reason, but there's actually uses for that thing. You can get some cool sounds out of it for recording, for layering guitars and that type of stuff. I have a lot of really cheap distortion pedals, effects pedals, and they kind of kind of really suck. But there will be a situation where you're tracking guitars and you need something maybe really, really nasty to cut through, to dirty it up, or maybe you run some, like a bass through it, who knows. But there's always a use for something that you think is garbage. Now, that being said, don't use garbage pedals on your live rig that you're going to be bringing and subjecting audience members to, because that's disgusting. So, keep that in mind. But getting back to this pedal board thing, so I've got those 3 effects always in the line. After they hit those 3 effects, the wah, the compressor, and the preamp, they go into this Eventide H90. Eventide's a company that's been around since... Eventide Clockworks is what they used to be called. It's been around since the late 60s or 70s, and they actually started out making these, like, delay systems for... It's like aviation. It had something to do... It wasn't the black box thing, but it was like a... they needed a delayed playback of audio. And they actually made them. Eventide was the people that did that. The thing that they ended up becoming known for after that is they use that technology to make delays and eventually pitch shifters. And they were very high-end pieces of studio gear. Their harmonizer, the H910, was used on a bunch of... Tony Visconti used them on a bunch of Bowie albums. It's all over that Iggy Pop album, The Idiot. They use them on drums, the detuned toms. Later on, Steve Vai was known as, I guess, the guitar player that used these things a lot. Basically, they're high-end effects. The pedal has the same chip in there that's in their, like, flagship studio harmonizer, reverb, delay thing. So it hits this unit, and then it sends out the signal to this box over here. And this box is a looper that has basically all the distortion effects in there. I can bypass, even if the pedal doesn't have true bypass, I can bypass it with the looper, and then, and also, I'm sorry, it hits the looper, and then it hits a volume pedal, and then it goes back into the Eventide. So the cool thing about the Eventide is depending on where depending on what effects I'm using, I can move the insert to different places. So for example, if I have a pitch shifter and I want dry guitar going in the pitch shifter, I can have the pitch shifter first, and then if I have a delay, because it can do 2 effects at a time, so I have the delay after it, I can actually put the distortion in after the pitch shifter, but before the delay. And that works really, really well, because you get some of these effects. Some sound good before distortion, some don't. So like, for example, usually, if you had something like this, and you wanted to use a, let's do like a... let's go that. I guess like your typical stuff, like a tremolo or something like this. So with that, I'm hitting distortion before the trem, so the distortion's going up and down like this and this and this. Typical modulation stuff, and you got your delay afterwards. But there's some effects that are even modulation that do not sound good after the distortion. So like things like, for example, like a univibe, and this does a really good univibe. They sound... Oh, I'll just show you. If you put the distortion through it, afterward, if you put before the distortion, it doesn't give you that whoosh, that. So, playing with older stuff really helps. So everybody says you go... What is it, like wah, or pitch shift, or wah, and then distortions, and then modulation, and then time-based effects. And that's like the rule that's nice to follow, but you don't have to do that stuff. It just kind of, it's the normal, I guess. But there's sometimes you want to put distortion before the wah, like fuzz faces do not like anything going before them. They're just very simple pedals, and they're very impedance-based, so like, pickups and output really affect the input of those things. And sometimes it sounds cool to put it before wah. You do it afterwards, but, there's also... That is the cool thing about this. There's really no wrong way of doing anything. This stuff does sound better than other things, but there's no wrong way to set up your effects. So pretty much, yeah, that's I've got everything just hits the Eventide, send return, and after the Eventide just goes back to the amp. So for this is the extra stuff. For the Rumble Trio gigs, I just got into using a lot of the original analog style gear, you're in surf music, which is an actual real spring reverb tank and tape delay, which none of this is necessary, but it's like, this is kind of where I stand with a lot of the emulation of effects and the actual thing. And this goes for people using synthesizers and basically anything, especially in a studio. The stuff they had, it used to be like a lot of the digital emulation sounded pretty bad. Then it got okay, but now it's like really, really good. So for ease of use, reliability, traveling, gigging, the digital stuff and the emulation stuff is probably better. But there is a thing that changes when you actually get your hands on the real deal. I don't know if you play keys, but if you've ever played, an actual Rhodes piano versus just whatever keyboard with a sound, it sounds good, but the attack, the vibe, the whole feel of it is different, and it does make you play differently. Like you probably get a Strat to sound like a Les Paul, but like playing a Les Paul, it's like it's a different vibe. It does certain things easier than another guitar can. Once again, not better or worse, but it's just different. It's like a different paintbrush. So moving into this thing, it's kind of, I do it because I like it, and I like the tactile, the physical thing here. So I guess first of all, I'll show you the reverb because that's kind of simple. It's the reverb unit is a copy of the Fender. I think it's like the G1 or G6 something. I can't remember the name of the circuit, but this company, Surfy Bear, they basically took that Fender reverb unit, cloned it. Instead of using tubes, it's all transistors. So it's a solid state version of it. I've used both. This sounds very, very close. It also has true bypass and a volume control, which the original ones didn't have, and they kind of dropped volume. So if I go in here, I'll go for like a very heavy, like saturated type of all that stuff. It does the drip like does all that really well, and it's got a dwell control tone. Basically, dwell is like how hard it hits the reverb pan. So if I crank it up, like more sustain. Another thing that is very interesting about this is reverb with a tone control. A lot of times you can do a lot with a reverb just by controlling how much top end and low end it has. So for example, the tone control is cranked so the reverb is brighter than the guitar. Now, if I wanted to do something, if you pull back, it warms up, stays out of the way of the guitar. So it matters a lot for the style you're playing. And I noticed when using this, depending on, this goes with a lot of delay and reverb, if you're gigging somewhere and it is a large room, or any size room, you're going to have to adjust the mix control. And that just happens to deal with, sometimes rooms have natural reverb in them themselves. And just like if you were in a play and you have to wear stage makeup so people know what expression you're making, it's kind of like that with effects sometimes. If you're, you got a whole band going, you got audience, it's bouncing off like a tin ceiling or whatever, and you're going to have to like jack up the delay mix because you're not going to hear it. At home, if you do the same thing, I've like gone after gigs, brought the pedal board back and just plugged into practice, and it's like, well, this sounds like garbage, man. but you need that extra amount. You need to exaggerate it more because you're not. And this is a thing with the bedroom home guitar player. You're hearing your guitar, and I think this is a very important point here. You spend your whole life listening to just you playing your guitar alone. And in that situation, you might be going through and it's like, oh, I need the right amount of low end, keep it all warm and all this stuff. And that's great and all, but when it comes down to it, like even if you're in the studio recording an album, your guitar sounds awesome, the engineer is going to take away a lot of that. As far as for it to sit in the mix correctly, you end up high passing a lot of stuff. You take out a lot of low end because you don't do that. It's not going to sit in the mix properly. It's going to sound muddy. You might even boost the top end a little bit or mid range actually. So it's definitely sounds different in the album. Also, those tones that you really like, and one of the cool things about the internet now is some people get a hold of stems of just the guitar parts or different rhythm section tracks. And if you listen to them, they always don't sound as pretty as you think they are. They usually end up sounding like thinner and kind of like harsh. And the reason is if it didn't sound like it wouldn't stand out in the mix. So it's all this stuff is about context. If you like using effects, it can be a slippery slope. It can, on the positive side, it can inspire you to play something that you maybe you usually wouldn't. It can enhance your guitar part in a mix. But the one thing that it is not going to do well is basically sound good whenever you just want it to. It really, your context dictates that. Just because you bought some new pedal that does, I don't know, some dumb stuff or something, doesn't mean that everybody in your band and everybody at the gig wants to hear it too. Like it's not how life works. It just doesn't work like that. But in a good situation, it is making what you are playing more interesting. And to do justice in a mix, like I was doing a session with some friends this past week, and there was like a song, and it was like a Steely Dan type thing or something like that. And there was a part I had to do that was just pretty simple guitar part, like rhythm stuff. I wanted to make it more interesting, and if I did it just regular, right, clean, just as is, it sounded cool, but it was just like with the root. It's cool, I had another guitar doing the same thing, like so imagine those are together. That sounds fine, man. It sounds great. Doesn't pop out too much, but if you add certain effects to it that aren't too crazy, it like gives it another like mood. So I put on, what is this? We got is this the flanger one, or is this? Yeah, so I just added a flanger to it. It like, you don't have to do much different, but it kind of changes the mood. And now you've got like, I don't know, when I hear that, it sounds like Ernie Isley. As opposed to just this. Which sounds good, man. Sounds good, but when you're doing this thing, man, it just sounds way good. Like, so yeah, it's a vibe type of deal, man. It's a vibe. But that's just something. Just keep that in mind when you're playing. Keep it in mind. And while we're on not annoying people, because guitar players are kind of guitar player's always like, oh, the bass player sucks. Oh, the drummer's dumb, or blah, blah, blah. Well, guitar players like never can read music, and because they're really dumb. They can't read music. They can't. They're like. They have this like elevated it's not really important, but guitar players are I feel like the most, after singers, are the most entitled people in bands. And like where singers are entitled because they don't have to bring anything or carry anything, guitar players are the opposite. They have to bring everything to the gig, and they have to like have all types of garbage and twiddle knobs all the time. Most of my income comes from running sound for bands, in front of house monitors, stuff like that. Fortunately, at this point in time, I work with a lot of very professional bands. So when I say professional, I mean just like the way they conduct themselves. But one of the worst things you can do is go out, buy yourself a bunch of pedals. I don't even care if they're the nice pedals that I like. And you come to your gig and you're like the second band in a 3-band bill, and then you go to put out your gear in the changeover, and then you start like putting out one pedal at a time, like yeah, dude. You'd be surprised. Like you'd be surprised, like at the level, like some bands where you're like, nah, they'd figure that out by now. No, dude. I didn't see this personally, but supposedly there's a gig, and Trevor Dunn, the dude that plays bass in Mr. Bungle and all these other bands, is his solo band. He like showed up and had like a one spot with like a tuner and some crappy like shit wasn't working. I was like, dude, what? So I don't know. I guess he just didn't give a shit about that gig, or who knows what. But I'll give him a pass. But most people that are playing your average band, you do that, you're doing a disservice to your band and the other bands there, because it's taking you longer to set up and to like get off the stage. What are you doing? You bring like a duffel bag and just like individually, like, it's like, come on, man, what? Oh, I'm sorry, the whole world revolves around you and we're all on your schedule. Nobody's gonna like you. The audience doesn't know what's going on. The band's going, how come this next band starts so late, and blah blah blah. And it's just because somebody like just didn't. They already spent money on a bunch of pedals, but they couldn't spend like an extra $100 on or use that like a skateboard or something. Anything like an IKEA shelf or something like that. Like you can find stuff in the garbage. The first pedal board I had was like particle board I found, and I just cut it into the size I needed. So I was saying, be cool and don't do that. It's just inconsiderate, and it's not very professional. And say what you want about pedal boards, but they are pedal boards. You can pick the whole thing up at one time. Like, what if you're on a gig and you set up your, whatever you want to call it, your little world, and then we're like, oh, hey, can you move over a little bit? We're just going to put this wedge here for the keyboard player. And you're like, and you got to like pick up each one individually. So you're like, no, that's not enough. Let's go, no. It's like, dude, stop clowning. Stop clowning with your gear, people. Yeah, dude, I'm serious. You're only a guitar player in like a band at a bar. Like, don't do that. Don't do it. Don't do it, man. I mean, maybe you saw like Hendrix with a couple pedals at Woodstock that weren't on a pedal board, but that stuff, like, they just invented pedals. Like, they didn't know. And like, and also they had batteries in them, so you didn't have to like plug them in. I don't know. So that's kind of trash when people do that. That's like one of the things that really bothers me a lot. It's like right up there with drummers that don't set up any of their drums until they get on the stage. It's like, oh yeah, sorry, there's like 8 bands on this hardcore punk show, and like, okay, well, let's just set up. Let's take the cymbals off of the stands while you're on the stage. You're not, the next band ain't gonna use their own cymbals. It's fine. Just do that. So don't do that ever, please. Don't do that. All right, so moving on. I got some little notes here. Stuff that I wanted to talk about. I mean, those were like, sorry, Dad, can't talk right now, bruh. Probably be like, oh, hey, I didn't know you're doing this thing. Oh, cool, man. Okay, yeah. So the gig stuff. I got a little, list here. I talked about this a little bit with the mix thing, but if you play in bands that play gigs where there's monitors, and this is something I run into a lot, especially with the instrumental band, there is this balance that happens with your guitar amp and your monitor and where you're standing. And then the other thing that happens on top of that, well, first let's start like this. For me personally, I like the sound of the amp itself. If I can hear what is actually coming from the speaker of my amp, that is the most desirable tone. Because even if I'm in the studio, before I put a mic on that amp, I want to know that what the sound source is actually producing something that I approve of, that I like. On stage, you sometimes will not be able to turn your amp up loud enough to where you can hear it from where you're standing with the whole band playing because of the volume in the room. You don't want to... Guitar amps are very directional, so we've all been to a gig where minimal miking or just the amps are loud and you walk past the stage, but when you walk past the guitar player, it gets ridiculously loud for like a 10-foot space, and that's it. And that's not good for the mix in the room. So you keep the amp volume down. Well, if you're just playing guitar, you can kind of get away by standing right next to the amp. Like when I play Flavor Project, it's an 8-piece band. There's horns, a keyboard player as well, singers. It's a large band. So I usually end up right next to the amp. And if it's a small amp, I always try to get the amp as high up close to my head as possible so I don't have to turn it up as much to hear it. Now, if it's a situation where I'm in the front of the stage or if I have to use a microphone to, God forbid, to sing, I'm not going to be close to that. I'm going to have a monitor right in front of me. So then there's this issue of, okay, well, we can send the guitar through the wedge. And in this situation, it kind of really, you're putting your trust into the engineer and hoping that they can handle it right. And what I'm talking about is, if you all have ever just put any mic on a guitar amp and just not touch the EQ and listen to it through a PA speaker, front house speaker, or monitor, it will sound vastly different. The speaker on a guitar amp has a very limited frequency response. They cut off around like 6K, maybe somewhere near 7. And basically that sound we hear, even when we add a lot of gain, like so. That stuff. So if we are going through your amp, this shit sounds great. It's like, oh, I adjusted the treble just fine. It's not fizzy or anything. Well, when you get it back in that wedge, if nobody EQs what that is, it sounds terrible. Reason is that the monitor or PA speaker is full range. It covers anywhere from as low, if you have subwoofers, you can go down to 20 hertz. Or usually microphones, like their response is around like 30 to 20 hertz at the bottom. And then it goes up to like 16 or 15K at least. Which, in terms of what we hear, the most annoying noisy frequencies is around 3K, 4K, around there. That's what they call the noise frequency. That's the nasally, nasty sound that you try to pull out from certain things. Also, if you want something to cut through a mix, you can kind of leave it in there. But once you get above kind of that range, it's what we call treble, but above about 7, 8K, it start to be what engineers will call air. Okay? Air does not add a treble sound to your instrument. It kind of gives literally an airier sound, and when I mean that, it's more of like a sheen on top. Like in when they used to mix albums to go to record, they had to do like a mastering for vinyl. So they would do things like boost everything above 10K, which is like starting to go outside of your range of hearing. But if you A/B them, the one with the high end boost has a more. It almost sounds like you pulled like a blanket or more like a sheet off of it. It's not super, super, super noticeable right away, but in a whole mix, it sounds great because cymbals and things with these acoustic instruments, acoustic guitars, pianos, they have these overtones that are up there, and in the right situation, when you boost that up, they sound really good. They sound almost more natural. Electric guitar is not one of those instruments. Because of all these electronics and things and the clipping that happens in the distortion pedal, we get all this extra frequency information. And when I'm saying that, I'm talking about it adds like extra harmonics. And if you all have ever looked in distortion pedals and really gone down that rabbit hole, one of the things they talk about is even order and odd order harmonics. And that may not mean a lot to people, and it's really not important what you know. But the way things clip and distort, they will impart different parts of the overtone series in that. And they're very subtle, but it's a different coloration. So getting back to where we're going with this, with the monitor, when your full frequency is going back to the monitor, it's got a tweeter in it and everything. It is pumping everything there that we didn't hear in that mic. So to make your guitar sound decent, the engineer hopefully knows to cut off all that high-end information. So when I'm mixing guitars, electric guitars, I start by just taking a high shelf and dumping it all the way down and bringing it up to like 6 or 7K to start. Because I know that nothing that guitar amp is making is above that. And if you're in a small stage, you might pick up cymbals in it and all this other stuff. So you take your EQ, you go low pass, you take off everything on the top, and then just start sweeping it back. So it like, go even too far just to see what it sounds like when you go beyond where you should. Like, all right, that's too muddy. All right, over here, okay, we're getting that presence back. So it's great when you can get that sweet spot and try to make it sound like how it does here and there. Another thing that you need to consider is on the other side of the frequency range. Take out that rumble, because that cabinet in front of you can reproduce a kick drum, bass guitar, all that stuff. But it's also picking up stuff from this amp and giving you a unnatural sense of low end because it's exaggerated through that speaker. So you've got these things. So let's say you got a good engineer and they got your mix sounded fine, all that. There's one last part that still screws with me to this day is phasing and stuff, man. You'll like, your amp's here, your monitor's up there, you'll walk up there, you'll sing, you'll stand back, and there's this area where you get an even mix of both. And as much as that might sound like it would be cool to hear more of your own guitar, which is awesome, it does this weird phasing thing, and I do not like it at all. So if I'm doing that, I'd rather hear only the wedge or only the amp. A lot of people will use the full direct thing, and that is kind of a hack for, not hack as in like a bad comedian hack, but like it's a way to get, it alleviates some of those problems. You don't have to worry about what's going from a mic to this cabinet and all that, because there's a raw mic, you got to EQ this stuff. The emulators sound like a cabinet with whatever mic you've told it to virtual mic in there, and is going to front of house sounding exactly how you want. You don't have to EQ anything. You should, but you don't have to EQ anything, and it's going to come back how you want. It's just the nature of full range speakers. They do not play well with guitar unless you do some stuff to them. One of the coolest things I heard about this situation is there was a tour back, the G3 tour. You remember that? It's like Steve Vai. The first one was Satriani, Steve Vai, and Eric Johnson. Eric Johnson, yeah. But on that tour, I read some interview, and Steve Vai, with his monitor rig, I'm sure he's like all in-ears now, but he had 2 sets of monitors in front of him. So he had the monitors that were giving him the band vocals, all that. Then he had extra monitors loaded with just 12-inch Celestion speakers. They're literally guitar cabinets on the ground. And he just ran the feed of his guitars, that same feed that's going to front of house, to those 12s, and basically alleviated the problem of having the crappy guitar type thing. I don't know. It's a different thing, especially with something like that that's doing feedback live and it's got to come through monitors. Like, monitor feedback will work, but it sounds better when it's actually a guitar cab spitting all that back out. So just keep in mind, when I'm doing the Rumble Trio stuff, you're on a small stage usually, and we've been playing outside a lot, so I can get away with turning the amp up more. And it works. It works fine. There's no singing, so you don't really have to worry about that. But basically, yeah, man, that's kind of my philosophy of live playing. I didn't really get to go into this Space Echo, but I think it's worth noting. I talked before about how certain, I should say, emulation of effects is a real deal here. So, for example, let's make sure all this is off. And it's just that. Okay, so I've got a slapback on here. And Eventide makes very good copies of real things in there for their pedals. So, here's just a regular slapback. And one of the Space Echo that's cool is if you listen close, there's almost kind of like a chorusing of... It's like a little out of tune. And the real ones do that as well. The delay you're hearing is not digital. It's not a sample. It's literally a tape. It's a tape running around in a loop, and there are a lot of anomalies that happen with things like that. So in this Eventide, okay. So now let's switch over to the real thing. And we'll see if we can match the time on that. Okay, let's see that. Now let's bypass that and see how close we got. A little faster. Go back to here. I think that's pretty close, right? Let's see this. Okay, yeah, it's a little faster than that. We'll get that there. Now, let's go to the real thing. So, sounds good. But if you get listen really close, this has more messed up stuff about it. And if I do it even louder, and I'll do a longer delay... So you do hear that warble in there. And also there's a little bit of distortion in this. It's got an input volume that distorts very easily. So I'll show you. This is where I have it set for usable stuff. But if we turn this gain up, it gets very dirty. Now, there's a lot of stuff that's messed up about this tape machine. Actually, the interesting story about this is I got this from my uncle who bought it in the 70s, not for guitar, but to put delay on his PA system for vocals. At the time they had, I think it was right before, he was Effectron or whoever, who makes, Russell, what that company that makes the blue boxes, blue rack mount stuff is Effectron? Yeah. Before those had become a thing, it was the early analog delay. Tape Echo is like the best sounding delay you could get. And the Space Echo itself was interesting because unlike the Echoplex, which, you know what, I'll draw this out because it's a little easier. And this might actually help, I don't know if y'all, the deal with Tape Echo and like how it works, but at one point in time, they had an Echoplex. And the Echoplex had this, basically, this little tape cartridge here, right? Let's see if you can see this. There we go. A little tape, this thing, and it goes like that. All right? Inside this cartridge, and actually, this might be a little more accurate. It was like a cassette tape, only this came out of it, and then it went across this little thing. You had your tape head here. You had, let's see, you got your So it's going this way. You've got your erase head, and then you've got your record head right here, and then you've got your playback head. Now, what made this thing interesting is to change your delay time. I should have made this bigger, but this playback head right here could move this way or this way. So what would happen is, if you wanted more delay, you would take this slider and the physical tape head would slide over so it was more distance between it. Okay? And for a long time, that's how these worked. There were other ones, like I think Guild had one, whoever made the Echo Rec, where it was a disc, and you'd write onto the outside of this disc. It had the erase head, the record head, and then your playback head, right here, that probably no one can see, can go either way around this, and that's what determined how long your delay time was. Feedback, just the delay amounts, they just fed the output into the input again, and it just played it back. All right, so obviously one of the main problems with this is you couldn't get delay over a certain amount of time. You could make a giant Echoplex with, a 3-foot long loop of tape with, where you move the tape head, but that just was not feasible to do. And also when you get tape going that long with that much space, you're running all these problems. So what they did with it's pretty genius what they did with this thing, is they made, you ever seen an effect where they call it a multi-tap delay? You ever seen that, where they talk about that? Basically what multi-tap delay means is that they added, and it comes from tape echo, they added more heads to the thing, basically. So on this, you have this little bin right here, okay? All right, we'll do the best I can. And there's if you're looking at it from the top, there's tape in here like this, in this weird loop, okay? And it just kind of freely flows there. So then it comes out. Let's do this. This tape thing, this looks like garbage. Okay, so the tape thing happens here. So you got this, goes out, comes here, comes back. There's a little thing right here, a little guide right there. Okay, so this is tape right here. This is the path it goes. Now, what they did is there's always an erase head, which happens here, because you got to get rid of the stuff that comes back, or else you'll have delay forever, and that's terrible. I don't do that looping stuff, man. I don't do the thing, man. I'll let Dave Watkinson do that. He's the best at that stuff. But so anyway, we got an erase head. We've got the record head. That's where the magic happens. Okay, so you're playing, and all right, you're like, we need more of a delay time. So they go, how's this? Instead of doing one head here, moving around, what if we took 1, 2, and 3 playback heads? And with the 3 playback heads, it lets you do really cool stuff. Like, let's say you only want to use the first head. It's like, oh, well, that's one fixed range of delay. Second head, that's another one. Third head, that's another one. They're like, well, if we need to do something to make it so you can go variations. We can't just have 3 settings on there. So they added a speed control for the motor. So basically, if I'm going in and I go to the first setting on here, I have a range of this for the... That's slowest, fastest on this one. Then you get to move up. Next one, you got this range. Tape's got to catch up with the speed. And then the longest you can do is... That's as long as you get. That's as many as you can do. The other cool thing about this is they do things like use different playheads and different combinations. So if I were to go to one of these other settings, here that's like a bump, bump, bump. And it goes, if you listen to Brian Setzer stuff, and there's the trip. So that's one of the cool things. Now, in relation to this, you can do a lot more. This blows this away. But having that feel and being able to just actually like alter it as you're going, like, and having it, the reason I do this up here is because, like I said, a lot of times you are going to have to reconfigure in various situations on the fly. So the reverb mix I got right here, my delay mix. I think also one notable thing is usually when people are using a space echo for guitar, you just run into the input, then write out the output, and your guitar passes through it. The preamps in these space echoes are very noisy. Lots of hiss. It's just you can improve them, but it's just part of their design is not great for that. I mean, that part of its design. So what I did is pretty much wire it up like you would in a studio if you're recording vocals. When you send vocals to it or whatever on the mixer, you don't send the whole thing through the effects. You use a send, which basically splits the signal up like a little mixer and sends whatever portion of that signal you determine will go to the effects unit. And the effects unit only sends back wet. It only is the delay. There's no dry signal in there. So I use this little Carl Martin looper. It is an input and output and a send and return. And for the send and return, it has a mix control. So my guitar stays completely clean. The tone, the dry tone stays sounding great and super, like, I was like prepared when I ordered this thing. I was prepared for it to like help and and when I actually did it like this, I thought it was broken at first because it was so quiet. I was like, oh, it must not be sending the signal through. And it did. It sounds great. The other little trick I did is they have this little, so if you look here, I'm going to just turn this around. So if you look here, they have instrument inputs. There's a microphone input here, which is also the way they set up. Once again, old equipment, still figuring stuff out. Stuff is really dumb. Like, stuff is dumb. That's why we have the Jazz Master. Oh, see, this one has a real bridge on it, not the fake one. But, like, the Jazz Masters, and I shouldn't talk because I'm, like, building a Jazz Master right now, making it like a vintage one. But there's, like, all types of problems that just were not seen. Like, Leo Fender didn't really play, so, like, the basses had a thumb rest on the bottom. So it was like he thought people would hold it like this and play with their thumb because he didn't really even play guitar. Cool dude, though. He didn't play guitar. Really smart guy. But so when you were using this for vocals in a PA, they had this from PA jack. And what that does is it's for accepting a send from your mixer. And it has a little switched input that kills the dry signal. Okay, so it's only wet coming out of there. So if you just take basically like a instrument cable and make sure that it's not shorted so that ground and hot are still not touching. You put it in there and it kills that. It makes it think that that's where the signal is coming through. But in reality, it's coming from this preamp, which is why I can change the gain of the delayed signals. So I'm just coming out of there, high output here. It's just, and I have the mix on echo volume all the way up. This also has a reverb tank in it that works. It's like the worst sounding reverb ever for guitar. Where it does sound cool is, and this thing became a staple of dub reggae. So a lot of those things where you hear a snare hit and it's like the tubby sounding, like very muddy reverb on this actually works really cool for one hits. Like if you just hit just that snare drum. Also, this is the other thing about dub, and I've got this set up more for guitar stuff, so it's not as whacked out as you can get it. You can calibrate these things like the tape bias and the intensity, which is the feedback control. You can get them to be jack them up more than they're supposed to, so you can self-oscillate the unit without putting anything in. What that means is, let's try this, see if we can do it. If you go and just one of these, and then let's go this all the way up. That's about as loud as I can get with this type of setup. But if you go in and you start, I'm like turning the feedback control up. So, like, that's the whole thing at dub, you know, where you're, like, hitting, and it, you know, they automate it out. So, this is cool to do on this, and I really liked that effect, but I realized that I can't do that while I'm playing. Like, I can't, you know, I can't alter that stuff. So, the Eventide being so awesome, basically anything you can think of, you can do on this thing. It's insane. It has a very good... It has a computer interface where you plug USB in your computer and you can do all your editing of patches and all that on a big screen instead of this little display. So I was like, hey man, I want to do dub stuff within a song, like on stage, you know, playing whatever. So I like set it up to where you can have, it just does it when you hold the button down. So this is just, I'll just demonstrate it. So I got one like that. Do I also have... Oh, yeah. So and then I got a tap tempo. So, you know, you can do the... So you can change it like that. But the other way I prefer to do it is if I hit like a... So I got the expression pedal hooked up, so I can actually... control the speed of the delay through this. So I can... So you know all that type of shit. It's a fun thing. Also, if you want to like add whatever type of texture to a song, and it's a breakdown or something like that, you can hit that. Just hit this. And the cool thing about this is even if you switch to another preset, it spills over into it. So if I hit like a... And now I'm on something else. I don't even have to mess with that. So that is another cool thing in relation to this. Another one, which is actually very simple, is that this just delays longer. It just goes longer. You know, I mean, like one of the presets I use on this is just it's the Space Echo. And I just have a variable subdivision. So for example, like... That's in triplets, and then that's in eighth notes. And it's dictated by the tap tempo. So if there's a song that's like... And I want to hit this, I'd subdivide it in triplets. So it ends up being cool. Get your long one, and then if you want to get out of that, you know, and you do your little thing, it's great, man. Just having the ability to do all of this, recall it anytime you want, it's great. I enjoy it very much. Are there any questions or anything? I don't know if I'm going over anybody's head and his stuff, but if any specific things, you don't have to do it now. You got anything, just let me know. Let me see what we're doing. I got a lot of other stuff to talk about, but I'll do. Okay, so this is a good departure. Okay, yeah, all right. Let's get into some conceptual stuff. So why does guitar tone even matter? Like, who cares? Like, why would we why would we even go through all this? Why would we do that? Like, it seems like a really expensive. It seems like there's not that much of a reward for having all this cool stuff. I mean, nobody shows up at your gigs. Who cares? Nobody's gonna hear it. I mean, why even play guitar, really? Well, I don't have those answers, but I have some insight to this. You should always, and this goes in, not to get too deep here in just playing music, but we're also talking about these electronics in the context of art. You should always be playing, or my philosophy is you should always be playing to the context. The context is so important, but playing to the song. If what you are messing with, if a piece of gear inspires you to do something or play differently, then and have a positive outcome, then I think whatever it is worth it. Same reason using these, even though I don't use all this analog gear all the time, I like the vibe it has. Same reason why I use different guitars. I mean, what I'm going to play on this guitar is different from that guitar. What I'm going to play on my Telly is going to be different from this. It's about inspiration, and they're tools. I'm not going to show up with a Les Paul to my surf gig. I can make it work. It doesn't really do it as well as my other guitars, but that's kind of part of what's cool about it. Also, maybe using that guitar for doing the surf stuff will make me do something that I wouldn't have done before that is cool. I think a lot of people, when they get into equipment, are purchasing equipment and getting things for the wrong reasons. I'm not saying everybody, but there's a fine line between and there's nothing wrong with just sitting at home and smoking weed and playing with pedals. Like, if that's what you want to do, go ahead, dude. That's great. But, like, if you don't really if you're trying to actually play with people and make art, sometimes all that stuff just distracts you from it. And that's kind of a really big thing for me. It's like, where is the context? Now, one thing I think is awesome, and I know everybody here has probably done this, and this is a positive thing, is when you get a really new, interesting piece of gear and you just play it all the time, and you come up with things you would never, ever, ever play on a guitar before that, because it's you thinking outside the box. I think that's what's great about gear, about effects like this. You just can't let it become what it is. I mean, a good example, I guess, of technology would be like Herbie Hancock picking up every brand new synthesizer that came out and using it in ways that, in great ways. I'll even other guys like Tom Morello. Like, a lot of people shit on that guy, but he's, he was using effects in a way that did justice to the songs. It was really cool. He was innovative with them. And that is, I think, a really prime example of where technology meets art, and you can't have one. I mean, the whole genre of hip hop is basically that. But, like, in rock, it's cool when you see that happen. I think a lot of people that don't embrace that, it's not that they're bad, but it makes them more of a traditionalist sometimes than like a typical practitioner or innovator. And there's tools for everything, and you can get as deep in it as you want, but just be careful, because you might be obnoxious and stuff sounds terrible and all that. Like, I think it's also important to note that, like, if you want your guitar to cut through a mix on a stage or band, I don't care what effects you use. Nothing will cut as hard as a guitar that is completely clean with nothing on it. Nothing on it. Nothing has the attack of a clean guitar. Distortion, I don't care what it is. Distortions get rid of dynamics. They level out your attack of everything. On a clean guitar, I swear to God, you will hear that over everything. It may not sound great, but you will cut. And that's very true when you get into distortions. There's a point to where more gain is bad. Like, for certain situations, like, for example, let's see, this is going to be super loud, I think. So this right here, let's turn all this other garbage off. This is like a Rat clone, and they're very. There's a lot of gain. It's like a thing, you know. It's all like those Nirvana albums. I think. Oh, also like Vernon Reid used one on that Living Colour album. But for playing lead. It's great. But if you start doing like all your rhythm stuff on something like that, just doing like open chords, like AC/DC style stuff. Sounds cool, but if you dial it back, you start to be able to actually hear the notes in it, and there is more definition. And you just have more control. And sometimes having a bunch of gain is just not what you need. And when you're in the studio, a lot of that changes. And you start noticing, oh, well, when I double a guitar part, you know, whatever it is. So let's say it's like that. When you start adding them up and they are all really distorted, they start to get less. The sound starts to get smaller instead of bigger. It turns into like this mush ball. But when you're using less distortion and you add these parts on top of each other, it gets bigger sounding. It sounds like there's more distortion. Prime example of that is like those Butch Vig recordings from the 90s, like the first two Smashing Pumpkins albums, Nevermind, Nirvana album. They all had massive amounts of guitar overdubs. And not like extra parts, but just double, triple, quadrupling. And that's like what a lot of older rock bands realize, is that if they do that, you get a way bigger sound by doubling everything. Black Sabbath, all those recordings have doubled guitars. And it's, you know, it's effective and something to keep in mind. But yeah, you don't need all that distortion. And also the cool things when you have less aren't, oh well, that's great. The pickups aren't too hot. You can get all these. And by having different amounts of gain, you can really fine tune. So you get all those. Another thing, emulating tones. I think that's like one of the best things you can do if you want to get better at getting sounds on your instrument. Nowadays, we have YouTube, where you can just look up a video and actually see the guitar player talking about their gear, and you can or you can look up like what did so and so use on this recording. Like, you know, it makes it a lot easier. But when I started playing, you had to just look through Guitar World magazines and hope there was an interview or see pictures. And so, like, one of the first times I tried to get a guitar tone took me like years and years, because I had to learn. First of all, how to play better, but also I didn't have a concept of how stuff was supposed to sound, because I just didn't have the knowledge of recording, of just guitar playing in general. So, like, one of the first sounds I tried to get was I've always been like really into Red Hot Chili Peppers, like the old Red Hot Chili Peppers, I guess. And old, it's like from Blood Sugar Sex, so basically from like 92 and earlier. But anyway, John Frusciante, that guitar tone on that album, I always thought was like really, really cool. And when I started playing guitar in like 1993, I think. Yeah, 93. And I had a Kramer Striker 600, which was like a awful metal guitar. Kramer made great guitars, but not mine. And it was like with grunge becoming huge, every music store, pawn shop had just a crazy amount of used pointy guitars. Nobody wanted them. Everyone wanted like a Mustang or something like that, or some weird pawn shop guitar, like some, So anyway, all these guitars got super cheap, so that's what I had. And I had like a little Squier bullet amp. I had my death metal pedal. I also had a fuzz face that I still have now. It's like crazy, but like why I even got that back then? But I was trying to figure out these tones, and it was kind of like this scratchy, like funk thing. It was like very Hendrixy sounding deal. And to me, when I heard it, I was like, oh, you must be playing this bridge pickup because it's thin sounding. He totally wasn't. I didn't know. I thought like you just like turn the treble up on the amp and that did it. And it just sounded like total garbage. So I kind of left that alone. And eventually was like, all right, I don't need to mess with that. So fast forward later, like in college, I had a better understanding of recording and effects and started to listen to this guy's stuff again. I was like, that kind of sounds like a compressor, like when I played with one, but like not exactly. So I also, at the same time, I also watched that movie Funky Monks. It's basically like a documentary on them recording that album. And in that documentary, there's a ton of shots of gear. And I realized like he was barely using any effects. The effects that he did have did a whole lot. There was this thing about the sound. So I guess first of all, let's talk about compression though. Those albums, like that album, his guitar was squashed with compression. Not before it went in, but like on tape afterwards. And that, as a tonal thing, is a huge deal. So like, let's see what we can do with that. So if I turn this up, and I mean like limiter style, and cut off a lot of what is happening, is, let's see, we do this. So without it, your attack kind of ends up sounding, it's fine, That's cool, but when you hit a compressor on, it actually like gets a little bit, it gets cool. It gets percussive and very, how you say it. So the cool thing about compression on here is basically, and this is what I use in a lot of different contexts, is compression takes, everybody knows it does it like basically to a fixed ratio. It takes like, let's say like your audio signal is going like this, right? That's your guitar. So what a compressor does is it takes the peaks right here and gets rid of them so that we no longer have this, and we just have these right here. So it makes the louder stuff quieter, but in turn, what happens is it makes your quiet stuff louder because the loud stuff is now quieter. So when you play chords, you hear all the notes better. So like it's a little like an attack thing. Oh, the phone's making noise on that. So basically, so that was a big part of it, like hearing all this stuff. So that covered the attack. So that was cool. All right, so that's one part of this taken care of. Moving on, I was like, well, he has all these other things. Oh, and also the neck pickup thing was a big deal. So it's like, man, he's got these. It sounds like it's chorus, but it's not like normal chorus. I don't know what it is. I found out dude was using a Univibe and a Boss. A Roland. No, it's a Boss. A CE1, which is like the first chorus pedal they had. The thing was really sounds really cool, but it like only had like one knob really for the chorus. Like you just turn it up and that's just more chorus, less chorus. Hard to find something that emulates it, but I did find on here something close. And it wasn't actually till I got better effects that could do more. Let's see what we got here. Okay, let's go back. Sorry about that. Okay, yeah. CE1 right here. So I was like, oh, that's that sound. So You hear like all that stuff that's like. So that was like, oh shit, that's how he's doing that stuff. And then mixing it with other distortions and things, like I was able to get that so I got that whole like tone. I was like, oh man, that's it. And so I would have never figured that out if I didn't watch a video on it and all that stuff. But nailing that tone is like, then you hear it in other things, you're like, oh, that's that. That's that same type of effect. It's this. Like the whole thing with the phaser deal is like, I just ripped that off from like the Isley Brothers, you know. You know, whatever that thing. It's like that's like the 70s. Zapp and Roger has that type of stuff. So, yeah, some other things I just think is really awesome about this effects processor is the ability to do synth stuff, like almost like sampling. Let's go to one of these pads on here. So through like crazy reverb and stuff and pitch shifting, it does this really interesting pad effect. So let me do, yeah, here we go. So if I just play like guitar into it, it does this. Practice like chord stuff on there. Let's see, it's still going. It like really opens up what you can do live. You can do hit like an intro of a song, and then you do this thing, and you do whatever on top of it. It's kind of like being a keyboard player. It has a ton of these types of sound hacks, I guess you could say. I'll do another thing where in one band I got a part that is, well, there on the recording there's a string pad, but it's not on in the band. The piano player is doing piano stuff, whatever Humvee's doing. So I started playing them on the some other things. It's very impressive what they do. So it's also got this synth deal. It's loud as hell. So I got like the modulation set up on this, you know, the so, a lot of things. Even in the surf band, I actually use, which is the one I use in that, is the, it's like a polysynth type of thing. Yeah, here you go. That's really fun. Yeah, I do that. We do that. What's that song? Out of Limits, that surf song. It's got the one that's like the, it's got the like, whoopsie daisy. It has that thing, and then the bridge, it's got that, so that's it. And when we play that, like, people don't know where the hell it's coming from. Like, look at the guitar, it's like, I don't know. It just inspires you to play. Like, I'll play stuff like that I usually wouldn't play, man. Dude, there's another one, the little organ, you know. Also, there's monophonic though, so this one you can't. Another thing. Oh yeah, let's talk about, like, man. Speaking of inspiring, I did this. I really like using rotary speaker emulation. I'm a big fan of Danny Gatton, and Danny Gatton used an actual Leslie cabinet with a box on it. They call it the Magic Dingus box, and he was a tinkerer as well, and it basically had the reverb tremolo controls on the amp, the speed controls for the Leslie, and it was able to switch between them all in this like project box that was stuck on the back of his guitar. And he even like controlled the Christmas lights on the amps and stuff. So, but he did really, really cool shit with a Leslie on his stuff. Also, what's really nice about the Eventide is when you go to fast and slow, there's a ramp. Or in other words, it takes time for it to speed up and slow down. This is based on a physical spinning speaker. So they don't just stop, man. So with this, you can actually hear, or slow it down. So I was like, yo, that's great. What if I make it sound more like an organ? So they do have, and it is crazy that they can do this, polyphonic pitch shifting. So if I play, I'll clean it up real quick. Here's with the extra pitches. So you can get a lot of cool, like, so you know all those like organ type things. And then to get, like, that wasn't enough. I was like, I need more craziness. So I found out there's a function on here where any harmony you can like freeze it. Like, and it'll hold that. So when you do it on this, you end up having like, so check this out. It sounds like a real organ. That's insane how much it sounds like a real organ. It's like crazy. So you can do the, or even, is even better when, really cool stuff. But also for accompaniment, you know, because it's... So you get all that accompaniment, you get a little bass line thing. I actually use that a lot. Not always with the harmonizer, but I do use that frequently. Let's see what else I kind of do a lot that I think is awesome. Let's see. Oh yeah, so here in the spirit of the freezing thing, I think I did one like a practice preset. Also, like this whole thing, like so all of this Eventide stuff, I just have like a singular sound controller. It's just basically, it's really cool. It is all operated through an app with Bluetooth, and that's how you program your scenes and stuff in there. There's like a MIDI in, and it's got a little page switching deal. But it makes it very easy. And also, like certain things where I have a synth going on, you can choose also to have no effects insert, you know, and it's just the unit as is. So like one of the things I'll do is I'll have my dry or my normal tone with distortion and stuff, and then if I hit one of those synths, the distortion usually is like not good for it because it's not going to track well if it goes before and after. It muddies them up, so I just like don't use it in there. So so if I'm doing you know, whatever crazy thing on here, and I go to one of these synths, it's back to clean. It is a cool thing. It's like one octave up, one octave down. So, very neat. All this stuff, man. And here's one more thing, since we're heading towards the end. I think it's very important to listen to and try to emulate non-guitarists. I think that's a gigantic thing that that guitar players need to do. I went to jazz school, and transcriptions are a big part of it. I still do transcriptions of all types of stuff. The cool note transcriptions I do are usually like trumpet players and sax players. One, they're easier to transcribe because I can only play one note at a time. All right, so it's like a cheat. So it's very easy to outline what they're doing and whatnot. Getting into keyboard players is another thing. Musically, you will learn different chord voicings that, you know, if you can reach them if they translate to guitar. But also, like a keyboard thing, this goes with guitar playing, is having like, let's turn this off. But let's get this pretty sound in there. So let's do a little bit of reverb, but not too much. So, a lot of guitar stuff is very spaced, you know? So if I'm playing this A minor chord right here, there is nothing less than a third on here. So it's going, you know, you got a fifth, fourth, minor third there, major third there, and a fourth. On a piano, and you know what, let's do it like this actually. A minor 9, because this is going to make it easier for my next point. But this is all stretched out. If you play this on a piano, you would have like this here. How many octaves? It's going 3 octaves basically. So you'd be pretty stretched, and it's not really what a piano player would play. Now, for a horn section to play this, it would actually sound pretty cool. But on piano, they're right together. So if you're playing something that's got the third in it and the 9, you can do like you would have that second in there, and that's what sounds really cool for certain things. So for example, let's see a good way to do this. Okay, so we've got that 9 here. We've got so if we wanted to, there we go. So that's like something using that type of harmony. Anything where you're using these minor and major seconds. For example, when you get into like weird chords, like like anything that has a sharp 11, which sharp 11's like flat 5, you know, like a diminished thing has like you know, if you're playing a diminished chord, it would be that thing. Well, it's sharp. It is getting like crazy theory stuff here, so just bear with me. In jazz and stuff, when you talk about a sharp 11, it's the 11th. You know, the extension is the same thing as the 4th, and if you sharp it, you get a flat 5. Technically flat 5 in your natural 5 instead of the 4, because little theory thing here, the 4th degree of the scale sounds like garbage on major chords and dominant chords. Like it does. So like if I was playing, let's use this shit right here, man. This is what I do it for right here. There's a freeze chord thing. So like if you're playing, let's say I'm gonna play straight up like C7, like dominant, you know. What? Hold on. Let's do that again. Let's make sure that's right. That's in the scale. That's in C, like Mixolydian. So now, what happens if we play the sharp 4 instead of that? Check this out. Which sounds way better. So you got your third, as opposed to sounds pretty awesome. No. Yes. So it sounds way better. Natural fours do sound really cool over minor stuff. So if you have like let's talk, like a G minor 11, which would be like this, like that. We can play there's the 4th right there. So it sounds dope like that. So so getting back to chord stuff, when you're getting all those crazy extensions, you're going to get really close intervals. So if you do like let's say we got an A7, you know, just straight up dominant 7 chord. 1, root, major 3rd, 5th, flat 7, you know. You got that there. If you do a sharp 11, you do that cool note. It's pretty tight. And you're playing that, you get these weird, just to make it happen, you're getting, by itself doesn't sound right, you know. Gives us context of it, so that's a big part of it. So listening to piano players, definitely you can get some cool stuff. Also, if you want to listen to a guitar player, other than jazz guitar players that do that well, Andy Summers from The Police is very awesome chord guitar player. So many good chords. This is a little deeper cut, but Andy Partridge from the band XTC, there's a really, really good interview with him, and I can't remember the name of the guy that does it. He has an awesome YouTube channel, and I'll have to post this up or something. He does analysis of like Zappa stuff, and he does a really good long form interview with Andy Partridge. And Andy Partridge talking about like, because he knows some theory but not a lot, but a lot of these chords in these XTC songs they're not what you'd think. Like there's like one song where it's a loud dude. There's one song where he is doing like, it's like G, F, C, and he's like, but instead of playing those voicings, let's do it, he does this, which is crazy awesome. A bass line is still the same thing. Which is just a cooler way of doing it. Is that G's ringing the whole time. And then he's got a little sus. It just makes it more interesting. Like instead of playing a major tonality, why not do like that sounds cool, and that's one of the things he was doing. You just start, you take chords like that you like, and say, what happens if I move one of the notes, like a half step? Oh, whoa, that's crazy. So now we got like it's like an F major, but there's a B flat in the bass. It's like, that's the fourth of F major. What? The fourth shouldn't sound good, but when the fourth becomes the bass note, the whole relation changes. And now we have these cool intervals. This one's a little dissonant, a little weird. But in the whole context of it, it's all over Steely Dan stuff. That whole thing. Just so much more, and actually just in sessions I've been in and songwriting sessions and stuff, here's another keyboard thing, man, is using chords that don't have the same bass note. Like you got a G chord right here, and you all have definitely heard this sound before. It's like, but if you put an A in the bass, it's like, whoa, that totally changes it completely, you know? God only knows has that part in there. But that's all chords with the not right bass note, and they make other chords. And I know this is like a gear thing. I'm getting pretty heavy into music theory, but just like, forget playing solos. You don't need solos. Learn chords really well, and if you learn chords well, eventually you'll realize you can play solos well. Like when I'm soloing, yes, I think in some modes and scales, like I'll think of like symmetric diminished scale or whatever, or even modes, like melodic minor or whatever. But really what I'm thinking is like, how can I layer a chord over something? Like if I'm in G here, I mean, there's that, but what happens when you put the 2 chord over there? Let's say we have the 4 chord with that in the room. So we just did. It's basically if you can just kind of alter what you're doing and see what happens with it. When you apply those triads or 7 chords or whatever you're doing in a solo, you're outlining harmony instead of just scales. Like in solos, or if you think of cool parts of solos, it's not when they're playing into all these like scale fast things. It's when it breaks it up and they maybe hit something like that instead of that the whole time, you know? And that's kind of when I looked back at solos that had these cool parts in it. It was when they broke away from that blues scale or whatever and like started playing, like superimposing other things over top of it, you know? Like if you're like the whole thing of that song I was playing earlier, man, like the verse of the song, verse and the chorus are like 2 different, or the same thing. Like the verse is a C sharp minor 7 to F sharp minor 7. The chorus is a E major 7, an E major 7 to a major 7. Well, that's what's interesting about it, is it's the same damn chords, dude. This, if you use this as the bass, that's an E major 7. And you go up here and use that as the bass, that's an A major 7. But if you go and you play this as the bass, now it's a C minor 7 and this is an F minor 7. So it's all in the eye of the beholder. And what is your bass note, you know? Like what? And then thinking about that, let's say if we are doing the C sharp minor to the F sharp minor, who's to say I can't play A major over that F sharp? Because it works, dude. It's like, oh wait, because it's in the chord. Oh, look at that. it's the same chord. Boom, yeah. So once you start realizing that, like, that's also another, like, cool thing in jazz. Like, if you're having trouble playing over changes, like, go through and simplify them as much as possible. Like, if there's like a 2-5-1, say, screw that. Don't need to pay attention to this. This is one note away from this. So fuck it. Let's just play just over the dominant instead. So now you just have. That's easy. That's super easy. So really, yeah, just simplifying things. That's my little solo lesson. But man, I think that's it. You know, if anybody's got questions, get with me. You know, figure out. I'll let you know whatever. But yeah, this is pretty much what I do. Try to keep open-minded about playing guitar. Always try to put myself in a situation that I'm not comfortable with musically and try to get myself out of it. I think one thing I will touch on, though, little gear thing, is strings and picks and cables. Buy nice cables. You won't regret it. And it is, when you have a problem at a gig, most of the time it's because you have a cable that doesn't work. So, I mean, I use these Megami cables. I've never bought one. I just find them on gigs. Like, I haven't bought a long cable in years. I do dish out the money for the George L cables. And I've, to the point now where pretty much the whole pedal board is either Megami or George L. And they're the solderless cables. They're great. They're not durable. You won't run them to your amp. Like, if a cymbal fell over on them, we just cut it in half. I use those. Okay, so then picks. Dude, so I got way into picks recently, and I found this company called V-Pick, and V-Pick is awesome. They make these acrylic picks that are like custom made. Like, they grind them down, and they have like probably like 60. Maybe, not maybe that, more like 50 different, maybe like 40 or 50 different types of picks. They go through all different thicknesses and stuff, and this is the only company, and I always use the smaller picks with the, and thicker, but this is like crazy. This pick is a 4, I think it's a 4.0 or something. It's like super big, and so what I realized is that I like the larger picks. I noticed my hand didn't have to work as hard. I didn't have to hold it as hard. I still got a big tone without putting forth as much energy. And these things are I love these. I got my uncle into these, and he was like, they have one called the Insanity. He was just like, man, I just want to see what it's like to get the giant pick. And its pick is like, I think it's an 8mm thing. It's like this thick, and it bevels to a point. And I recommend just playing on one that big so it exaggerates it, but you can understand how a large pick or a thick, heavy pick can help. These are also cool. You can kind of refile down the edges. I got a ton of these. I use this one. I use another one that's symmetrical. It's got 3 pointed sides. I end up using that one for, like, if I am playing metal or like loud music. These get chewed up a little too much for that, even being acrylic. But these picks, they're awesome. They rule. Yeah, they're just great. So, yeah, everybody have a wonderful day. Pleasure doing this. Yeah. So I'm just James Seretis on Instagram, my full name. Then also Rumble Trio and the Hustle Season podcast. But yeah, I put stuff up on there of, when I do transcriptions or gear. I don't really do much gear repair for people anymore. Like, I'll take some stuff that's just cool stuff, but I still do tinker with all this. I do all my own repairs unless it's something like a cosmetic guitar thing or on like a nice guitar. I don't mess with those. That has something to do with finish or frets. I don't want to run that. But yeah, everything else. So yeah, just check me out on there. And yeah, Rumble Trio, we got a YouTube that we just kind of post live videos to, and Hustle Season's got a YouTube as well, and a Patreon. So you want to support me, just go to the hustle season thing, right? We just cleaned out our Patreon. We need to buy more stuff. We need to build that money up again. We bought some cool stuff, man. But yeah, thanks for having me. This is really fun. I really enjoyed this. It was great. Nat, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hell yeah.
All right, James, thank you.
Yay.